I think it's not even paranoid to believe that CBDCs will mark the end of physical cash. I'm convinced it will happen. Spending limits, best before dates on the money end. I'm pretty sure that governments will increasingly impose CBDCs. It will be very invasive. Everyone will have an account with the central bank. It will become a mandatory legal tender, so people will have to accept it. There will be a holding limit on the digital wallets. Put your trust in government and hope for the best. Your privacy to be totally compromised. A government will be able to see basically what you buy from the cradle to the deathbed. Everything will be on an eternal ledger. Do you trust government? Do you believe they will only do good with that money? How to prepare for it?
Well, first of all, Patrick, thank you so much for coming in. And I do appreciate your time taking and educating us about today's subject. But before we jump in, could you please tell us more about you and your financial experiences and what are you currently doing today?
Yes, thanks, Mantas. Thanks for being on your podcast. Glad to be here. The topic we touch upon, CBDC, is very important, so I'm glad that we'll have a conversation about it. Regarding my background, I have been working in consulting and banking for basically all my professional career. So I was many years with Credit Suisse, for instance. I also worked on C-level for Saxo Bank Switzerland and for a bank in Liechtenstein. And currently I'm also consulting banks in Liechtenstein, or people who want to establish banks, let's put it that way. And I also work for university. So that's also another affiliation I have. I'm an adjunct professor at the School of Management in Fribourg. And there I'm also very much into the topic of banking, finance, but also crypto and CBDCs.
Well, I'm very honored to be joined by you, and we will definitely use your valuable experience for our today's topic. So, Patrick, what are the CBDCs? And do you know maybe who are the main developers of this technology, and when did you first hear about it?
Okay, so what are CBDCs? It's a very good question. There the discussion already starts. I think there's no one single definition of CBDCs, but you can think of it as money issued by central banks to the end user. Let it be people, individuals, or let it be on wholesale level, banks, etc. I've been first confronted with the topic of CBDC about 4 years ago. A friend of mine working for Deutsche Bank asked me what CBDCs are about, and that's when I started digging into the topic. And CBDCs is also fiat money. So it is basically created out of nothing, you know. And it is issued by government and backed by nothing. So there's this commonality with fiat as we know it, our fiat currencies. Now, how is it different to digital money that we know, that we deal with every day? We have bank accounts where we actually pay in our money. And as soon as we do that, this cash, let's say, we pay in, turns into commercial bank money. So it's no longer central bank money, that cash is, but it's commercial bank money. So it becomes actually a liability of the commercial bank towards the owner. But CBDC is a liability of the central bank. So that's the main difference between digital money that we know currently. It's a liability of a commercial bank, whereas CBDC is a liability of the central bank.
What are the features of CBDCs, if there are any, and the flaws? And let's say we have a CBDCs And what are the implications? How does the world looks like using it, in the broad sense?
Now, CBDCs oftentimes are marketed by central banks as it's just like cash, right? So it's digital cash. That's often the claim they make. Now, if we look at the core functions of money, and some people argue that there are four, some more, but if we look at the core function, it's a medium of exchange, it's a store of value, it's a unit of account, and it's a standard of deferred payment. Now, if we look at CBDCs, they actually don't fulfill these functions does, and we get to the reasons, but you can argue that they are less good of a medium of exchange, that they are less good a store of value, that they're less good a unit of account, and that they are not a standard of deferred payment. And why is that? Because CBDCs will most likely be programmable. So theoretically, if you think about the crypto world and smart contracts, theoretically you can do with CBDCs everything that you could also program into a smart contract. So you can create money that depreciates, that has a best before date, that actually is restricts the user to be used for certain purposes. It could restrict the user to be transferred to certain people or entities. It could restrict the user to be used within a certain geographic area, and so on and so forth. So the programmability actually is of CBDCs is theoretically boundless. The issuer could program anything into it.
And do you see the CBDCs coming into the fruition? Do you see the CBDCs becoming our new reality?
Yes and no. So, there we get back to your very first questions, where we have seen CBDCs already. We've seen CBDCs in action so far in Nigeria, for instance, the e-Naira. We've seen it in the Bahamas or the Caribbean, the sand dollar, and so far we've seen it in China. Now, the experiences are different according to location. So, for instance, China, what one reads, what one can read is there are pilots in various regions and it's working rather okay. In the Bahamas and most notably in Nigeria, the experience is quite catastrophic. So, will it come to fruition? I'm not quite sure. It depends. It depends on how it is actually designed, how it's rolled out, for which purposes, etc. And ultimately, will the people trust this new type of money? I think that's what it will depend on.
Let us say that people will trust that money because governments might say, we already have, a digital form of money and it's just better, cheaper, faster. How does that transition look and what will happen with our current monetary system?
So it will be a very it must be a balanced act of any central bank, of every government to introduce it, because what will happen if the central bank now starts issuing CBDCs, and that implies central banks will also have will actually have accounts for individuals. if we talk about retail CBDCs for individual people, they risk starting a bank run. Why? Because people would say, okay, I have my money on at a commercial bank. The central bank is the safer place because, well, a central bank by definition can't really go bust. So let's transfer it to the central bank. This would cause a bank run, and banks would run out of money, wouldn't be able to meet their liabilities, and would go bust. So even if people trust CBDCs, governments have to be very careful not to trigger these bank runs, and that's also why the ECB, for instance, says that there will be a holding limit on the digital wallets for CBDC, so you can only transfer a certain amount there and not your entire cash from commercial banks. But that's what would happen if people trust the system. They would try actually to bring as much money to the central bank as possible.
I do personally think that we are actually living in the pivotal financial and geopolitical decade. And let us say that they will be trying, to enforce the CBDCs amidst the geopolitical tensions. And how would you prepare for that scenario?
So I'm pretty sure that that governments will increasingly impose CBDCs on people, and the claim that they will do so in parallel to cash, I think, will just turn out to be false, because eventually there is no need for cash if you have really on a large scale rolled out CBDC. One needs to ask, why do we need cash in addition? Very simple. We mandate central banks to manage the money matters efficiently. So the question would come up then, okay, why does the central bank have to manage cash in addition to CBDC? So I think it's not even paranoid to believe that CBDCs will actually mark the end of physical cash. I'm convinced it will happen, absolutely. How to prepare for it? That depends. That depends on your personal outlook. Do you trust government? Do you believe they will only do good with that money and the new power they have, or are you a little bit wary and wonder, will there be spending limits? Will there be best before dates on the money and so on? Ignorance is bliss. If you believe everything will go fine, no need to worry, no need to do anything, and you just put your trust in government and hope for the best. If you believe that there could be some repercussions for me, then the situation becomes more tricky. I think there's still a chance to prevent it. There's still a chance to, for instance, in the Eurozone, to prevent the digital euro from being created. I think if you show that there are viable alternatives, adjusting money for the digital age, for the crypto world, and for smart contracts, for instance, by the means of tokenized deposits, you can still prevent it also by getting the banks on board, because the banks are to lose out massively by the introduction of CBDC. So if you have them as allies and try to prevent it, I think that not all hope is lost. So that would be my first advice. Still try to prevent CBDCs from coming into existence. We see a strong movement against it in the US, for instance. And talking about it will also make it more topical in Europe. So that's the very first thing. If CBDCs then were to come into existence, it becomes rather tricky to really avoid it, because it will be very invasive. Everyone will have an account with the central bank. Use it as little as possible if you can. There will at least be initially a phase when there will be cash in parallel out. There will be commercial bank money in parallel. So try to avoid CBDC as much as possible. It will be tough in the sense that you can then also expect governments to pay the public sector with CBDCs, for instance. So people will be forced to accept it. It will become if it goes according to the plans of the European Central Bank, it will become a mandatory legal tender. So people will have to accept it. But then if you get it, again, convert it into other means of payment, meaning commercial bank money, cash if still available, and try to use it as little as possible, as long as possible. If that fails, then you still have a chance. If you don't want your privacy to be totally compromised, you could put up a layer by having a company and using company accounts. So do as much as possible. I mean, you have a podcast, you could incorporate in a way, and have corporate accounts with which you then pay big things, a big share of your expenditures. Because you need to remember, with CBDCs, a government will be able to see basically what you buy from the cradle to the deathbed. So your first lollipop to your coffin, everything will be on an eternal ledger and will be listed, and government knows what you've purchased. And there may not be anything bad in there, but just think whether you want to share with government how much alcohol you consume, how many cigarettes you smoke, which religious community you contribute to, which party you are a member of, whether you have health issues, whether you have mental health issues, all of that you would automatically share by using CBDCs with government. And even if today it doesn't matter, it could matter down the road. It could matter if you want to apply for a job as a civil servant in 10 years' time, then maybe something will pop up. So this is my long answer to your rather simple question.
I would say that the best strategy to resist is not to use it. Although I think in the beginning it will be a very light version and very attractive version of CBDCs. It may not be, totally dystopian at the beginning, but as the more users comes in, then it basically means that you have to use it. You are forced to use it. So how does the Bitcoin plays into this digital world?
Yes. Now, so I think introducing CBDCs will be a catalyst for new forms of money. So what will happen is, should CBDCs be issued on a large scale, and should they come with all the disadvantages that we know could be programmed into them, we would see people trying to avoid CBDCs, and new forms of money would come up. And why do I say that? Because that's exactly what you had in Eastern Europe and the Eastern Bloc over 40 years. You had an official currency in the various countries of the Eastern Bloc. And this official currency was used then for all official business. So you would pay your rent with it, you would pay your groceries with it, you would pay your car that you eventually would get after 10 years of applying for it, you would get your car and you pay with the official currency. At the same time, then you would have, or they had, unofficial currencies, and that was Western currencies. And so whereas you could get a very restricted, narrow bundle of goods for the official currency, you could get against US dollar virtually anything at any time immediately. So black markets arose and people reverted to something different than the official currency. And I think if CBDCs come along with all the disadvantages, exactly that will happen. All official business will be done in CBDCs. Good citizens will use it. And all the stuff they don't want to have government known, or they want to purchase goods and services they shouldn't purchase, they will use other currencies. And that could be a catalytic event for Bitcoin, for instance, because people would then go for Bitcoin. Some people may claim, okay, Bitcoin with a pseudo anonymity is not the ideal currency. Monero should be it. But there will be people who try to avoid the official system and go into things like Bitcoin. I'm convinced of that. And also in the Bitcoin context, it's important to look who you vote for. You know, the political parties, you know, if elections are coming up, you know, get yourself informed. How do certain parties, what's their stance towards CBDCs? What's their stance towards Bitcoin? For instance, I looked at the German current government, that supports the introduction of the digital euro. And I was wondering, where does that come from? Because 3 years ago in the elections, CBDCs, digital euro, was not a topic. Now, of the three parties that form the current coalition, the governing coalition of Germany, one party is in favor of CBDCs. The other one, so the digital euro, the other two parties didn't say anything about it. So there's one party that pushes the other two parties into supporting it. Now, just make sure that you look at the party programs, that you go through it, that you do a little search. What do they say about things like Bitcoin, like CBDCs, and place your votes accordingly if that's important to you.
What are your opinions on US presidential election and the Kamala's proposal on the unrealized gains tax and, you know, business tax of 40%?
Yes. So again, depending how important the topic is to you as an individual, you can make, of course, major distinctions. The Democratic Party already a while ago actually suggested the introduction of the digital dollar. Already a while ago, there were plans that every single US citizen and company should get a digital dollar account. And then also against the backdrop of stimmy checks, it would make totally sense. You know, we hand out money, for instance, and make sure that people spend it by putting a best before date on it. Sorry. Now, of course, there are more and more Republicans who say no, digital dollar is not a good idea, who are outspokenly against it, most notably Trump. And so if that's a very important topic, vote accordingly, if it's an important topic to you. Now, unrealized capital gains taxes, let it be Bitcoin or let it be something else, for instance, real estate or shares for that matter. I wonder, how should it work? How should it work? I mean, you pick out a loan of a certain amount to buy a house. The house appreciates, and you are presented a tax bill but you have a loan. You don't sell your house. You have a loan on the house. How should you pay for that tax bill? The same if your share portfolio increases. Okay, you could say, I sell some shares, but by that you basically also send the share prices on a downhill road because people will put their shares on the market. So unrealized gains, I don't think that makes much sense. And in the other way, how does it work if your portfolio or your house depreciates in value? Do you get anything back from government? I'm a bit astonished about this proposal, to be honest, and I think it's not really realistic.
I think it's totally ridiculous. It's basically pure Marxism, you know, because the history of price controls clearly shows us that when the government imposes price controls, you see a lot of people in line and total shortage of supply of the goods and services, because you cannot sell, the goods and services at a loss. If a government, let's say, says that you have to sell a bread at $2, when it actually costs you $2.20 to make it. So the merchants would rather not sell than sell at a loss,
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's also if you bring that back, that picture, the bread, the baker, and CBDCs. The baker will also at one point ask himself, herself, should I actually sell all my bread against CBDCs because I don't like that type of money so much, or should I sell it against something else? So I could imagine that we will soon see then pretty empty shops where only CBDCs are accepted, and we'll see other shops, and you'll get maybe many more goods at not official shops, but that they will take any money, So it would be, unfortunately, it would be Eastern Bloc all over again. Why should the baker sell goods and accept inferior money? It could also be in the beginning that the baker only sells against physical cash, and then an exchange rate would form between a physical dollar and a digital dollar. So a digital dollar would not be equal a physical dollar. It would be worth less. And all the ramifications are pretty astounding when you think of it, that also one of the argument is we need to make sure that the financial system is not fractionalized. It will become fractionalized if you introduce CBDCs, no doubt. And we haven't even talked about the international perspective yet. How is international trade going to happen if every country has CBDCs? So how is one country going to trust the other that the CBDCs they get transferred for their exports is not switched off on the push of a button? We see the weaponization of the US dollar now with the conflict Russia-Ukraine. Who is going in international trade? Who is going to accept a digital dollar? But same thing one could ask for the digital euro or the digital renminbi. Will countries trust each other if they all have CBDCs? I guess not. But if not, then you need to set up a clearing system somewhere. A clearing system where everyone trusts everyone. But what should that look like? Do we go then back to gold? Is it going back to the future? There's so many ramifications that haven't been thought through yet. And it could be catastrophic. Domestically, as we said, bank runs, internationally, countries trusting each other.
You are exactly right about the Russia's assets being frozen and BRICS union forming up and the rumors and the plans issuing their own currency. And also there's a proven fact that since 2022 the East, which are the BRICS, India, China and Russia, bought historical amounts of gold since the World War II. So I am curious about this picture of BRICS and their plans against the dollar.
I think that there are two components to it, and the one is there is a very strong will to actually find a successor to the US dollar in international trade. I think the BRICS, they have declared that we want to find an alternative to that. So there is a strong will. Now the practical doing will be, I think, much more complicated because the euro has shown if you want to create one common currency across countries, not an easy feat to do. How to run it, operate it, how also among those countries, how to trust each other. If it's and there are various rumors out there that it will be digital, but that it will be, for instance, gold backed or gold backed plus something like a basket of raw materials. We don't know yet what it will look like, but also there it will be a matter of trust. It will be a matter of a clearing system among those countries, and the acid test will be really, if it's, for instance, gold backed, can I go with my digital token to a central bank and get gold for it? And I mean, we had that system in the US until 1933, when a president issued an order that the dollar is no longer convertible, and banned, by the way, private gold holdings. So it's, if it works, it will work as long until it doesn't work. But the will is there. The doing will be the tough one in the entire BRIC, in the BRIC construct, and also there as a CBDC. Will it be controllable? Can someone press remote controlled a button and switch the money off? Now that is, I think, the big issue that we will enter regarding international trade in the future. Will countries trust each other's digital currency?
That's a good question. And also, I do think that we are living in the most important US election in our modern day history, because Trump proposed that if he gets elected, he will remove all of the sanctions to the East, So the picture with Trump might look more peaceful, might look without CBDCs. But if Kamala gets elected, the world looks totally different.
Yes, I think you're right. This will be an extremely important and decisive elections, not only for the US, but also in the big picture, in the regarding the Ukraine-Russia war. Now, what is most important, however, I think you should always keep in mind is that whatever you do and decide, and who you vote for, and what you entrust the government with, the government can also change. So, for instance, if you now say, oh, okay, I believe that the digital dollar is actually not so bad, and Kamala won't abuse it, and you put your vote, you give your vote for Kamala, there will be government also after her. So you should be thinking in the worst case scenario. In philosophy, it's called the veil of ignorance. You should consider, or you should think of what could come after, what is behind the veil you don't know. So after that could be an extremely nice and benevolent government, but there could also be a very mean and nasty government. So the question is, do you want to give up certain powers to the worst possible government as a citizen? That's what you should consider. And if it's still okay for you, then okay, vote in favor of CBDCs. If it's not, then don't, because those people are only in power for 8 years or for 4 years or 8 years. Eventually a different government will come, and even if you trust the next government will be nice and won't abuse their powers, one down the line will do so. So be careful where you put your cross.
I don't trust absolutely no politician. I like the term we have in the Bitcoin community: don't trust, verify. So actually study each politician, look what they say, and also look what they do.
Absolutely. I mean, in the Bitcoin world, you also, I mean, we now have trustless technology, right? And one of the most favorite sayings of politicians is "trust me," you know, and then you have to trust them. And also Trump likes to say "trust me," and the issue is we can't hold them responsible if they don't deliver upon their promises. And that goes for politicians, but it also goes for bureaucrats. You know, Madame Lagarde of the ECB, she's repeatedly said, cash will always be around. Now, in itself, this statement is already nonsense, because always will always be around. What does she mean? Does she mean whilst I'm in office? Does she mean over the next 8 years, 10 years? Or does she mean really always, as she says, for infinity? And how can she make such a claim? And anyway, so if she makes a claim cash will always be around, now assume she's out of office and the next ECB head decides differently, how are we going to hold them responsible? How are we going to hold her responsible? How are we going to hold a successor responsible? They can virtually say anything and won't be held responsible. So, and that's the beauty about Bitcoin, trustless technology. We don't have to trust anyone. We see what happens.
How do you see the Bitcoin ETFs getting approved? And how do you see, all of these inflows and all of these institutions coming in, and banks are going to offer the Bitcoin services and so forth?
So the entire topic around Bitcoin and ETF, I personally find it absolutely paradoxical. Now, if you are really into Bitcoin and you know what Bitcoin is, and if you are familiar at least on the higher level, then you would buy Bitcoin and self-storage it, right? So possibly even somewhere in cold storage, and self-custody your Bitcoins. And now seeing that someone actually puts funds layers above the Bitcoin and creates an ETF, which then trades a paper which somehow guarantees that the Bitcoins are somewhere, I find pretty ridiculous. So, because if you're familiar with Bitcoin, then you know there's not only several layers that make it less secure above it, also legal layers, but also more expensive. So I find it pretty ridiculous. What it shows, though, is that people want to have a financial exposure to Bitcoin, and ETFs for those are possibly the easiest way to get that exposure. So in other words, if you think about Bitcoin, ETFs are ridiculous. If you think just having financial exposure in Bitcoin, okay, if that's all you want, then it's okay. It has certainly pumped up the price of Bitcoin to some degree, but I don't know how loyal these ETF clients will be should it go notably in the other direction.
Yeah, I think that it's a great store of value, but only over the long term, and that people should be aware and should study a lot of how Bitcoin is actually made, and do not trust anyone, trust yourself. I would say study the Bitcoin and yeah, be an independent thinker.
Yes, and also if we bring it back to the picture of money, um, well, that would be like accumulating money and never spending it, so it would not be a medium of exchange. But Bitcoin was initially created as a peer-to-peer payment network, right? So the idea was absolutely also to pay with it, and yeah, store of value. It would be a store of value. If nobody spends it, then it only goes up, but then it defies its own purpose. It's not a peer-to-peer payment network, that's for sure. But there we have another phenomenon in the euro, for instance. We see a downward slope, basically over the long run, since it has been created, the euro, slightly more than 20 years ago, a downhill slope in purchasing power of about 30%. So also fiat is not really a good store of value. It has less volatility, and maybe that's the idea behind it. Well, at least you get a steady decrease of the value of your money. It's not volatile, it's just a steady decrease. And but of course, for all those who save, and in some economies you still have a lot of cash saving or cash-like saving, it's disastrous if you lose 30% of your purchasing power over 20 years.
I would definitely agree with you, Patrick, that people should not store their value in the currency.
And still many people do. And what I have to admit, I'm also not a Michael Saylor type who puts all the money in Bitcoin. So I would also give people the advice, the usual thing, diversify, and there maybe Bitcoin is something nice to have as a part of your portfolio, but then please do it self-custodied and get informed, as you said. That will help you then also.
Do you have any favorite books, or maybe you could give any advice about the topic and in general in finance?
Particularly on Bitcoin, respectively, more on the workings behind it. I have a book to recommend. It's by Keir Finlow Bates, and it's called Move Over Broker, Here Comes the Blockchain. It's a very interesting book where he explains in more detail how cryptography works, etc. And it's actually, it has so many analogies where he describes complicated matters in an easy to grasp way. And he himself, he's a PhD in mathematics, but he manages to break things down so that even I can understand it. He does so wonderfully in this book.
Well, thank you so much. And also, thank you again for coming in. And I do really appreciate your time, and I hope people will be more aware about the CBDCs. And where could people find most and more about you?
Well, they can follow me on LinkedIn if they want to. That's basically my main outlet. Once in a while, I publish some papers. For those who are more on the academic side, they can find me on ResearchGate, etc. But LinkedIn is my main outlet, definitely.